Hollywood's biggest secret wasn't sex, drugs, or forbidden love affairs. It was something no one thought to question: height. Behind the glamour of the golden age, studios were quietly waging war against inches, digging trenches into sound stages, forcing actresses to be hired shorter than their leading men, and replacing custom elevator shoes every 6 months to keep the illusion alive. One studio spent more than $100,000 just hiding how tall, or how short, a star really was. Contracts were written around height limits. Camera angles became weapons. The public never suspected a thing. But who were they hiding? And why did it matter so much? Let's get into it. Number 1. Sammy Davis Jr. Sammy Davis Jr. stood just 5 feet 3 inches, yet on stage he seemed larger than anyone else. Born in 1925 into a family of performers, he was dancing professionally by the age of 3 with the Will Maston Trio, his polished shoes always landing perfectly on beat, astonishing audiences who couldn't believe what they were seeing. In the 1940s, nightclubs hesitated to book him. He was young, black, and short, and later, after losing an eye in a devastating car accident, many doubted he looked like a star at all. But Davis turned every rejection into fuel. He could play drums with explosive precision, sing with the smooth confidence of Frank Sinatra, and dance so fast it was hard to keep up. When people fixated on his height, he didn't hide it. He joked about it, disarming the room before silencing it with songs like Birth of the Blues. The doubts never fully disappeared. In 1964, when he was cast in the Broadway musical Golden Boy, producers worried again. He was 5 feet 3 inches, his co-star tall and Swedish. Davis didn't argue. He trained relentlessly, sharpened every movement, and shaped the stage itself to his advantage. The show sold out before opening, earned him a Tony nomination, and one critic famously called him the littlest heavyweight in town. In Las Vegas, hotels once refused to let him stay on the property. By 1968, he was earning $35,000 a night, demanding integrated audiences and the best suite in the house, and getting it. He went on to release over 50 albums, score a Billboard #1 hit with The Candyman, appear in dozens of films, earn Emmy, Grammy, and Tony nominations, and receive Kennedy Center honors in 1987. In 1965 alone, he raised nearly $750,000 for Martin Luther King Jr.'s movement, proof that in the end, Sammy Davis Jr. was never measured in inches. Number 2. Mickey Rooney. Mickey Rooney stood just 5 feet 2 inches, making him the shortest leading man in classic Hollywood. Yet from 1939 to 1941, he out-earned and outranked stars like Clark Gable, Gary Cooper, and Cary Grant at MGM. His small stature helped him convincingly play the teenage Andy Hardy well into his mid-20s, a role audiences adored. 16 films later, the series had earned the equivalent of nearly $1.9 billion today. With his boyish face and boundless energy, Rooney became a symbol of optimism during the Great Depression. Seeing him on screen made people feel hopeful, but the very traits that made him a star later worked against him. After returning from World War II with a Bronze Star, Hollywood no longer knew how to cast him. He wasn't a child anymore, yet he was still considered too small to play a grown man. Studios began labeling him with a familiar note: height problem. Romantic roles faded, salaries dropped, and by 1950, he was taking low-budget parts just to stay working. Then came an unexpected turn. Playing worn-down boxing trainers and fight coaches, Rooney earned Oscar nominations, and his size suddenly felt authentic rather than limiting. In 1979, a final reinvention arrived when Francis Ford Coppola cast him as a retired jockey in The Black Stallion. This time, being small was an advantage. The film was a hit, critics praised his performance, and Rooney earned yet another Oscar nomination, proving that even after decades in Hollywood, he could still surprise everyone. Number 3. Edward G. Robinson. Edward G. Robinson stood just 5 feet 5 inches, hardly the image of a classic Hollywood star. When he arrived in New York at age 10 from Bucharest, he didn't even speak English, only Yiddish and Romanian. With his round face and short frame, casting directors saw anything but a leading man. Robinson turned that doubt into power. He studied himself relentlessly, practicing expressions, posture, and a voice sharp enough to dominate a room. When Little Caesar premiered on January 9, 1931, his portrayal of mob boss Rico Bandello changed everything. Audiences stopped noticing his height. His presence swallowed the screen, making everyone else seem smaller. Warner Brothers still worried, quietly inflating his listed height and using camera tricks to protect the illusion. It didn't matter. Made for about $280,000, Little Caesar earned over $1.5 million during the depths of the Depression. By 1933, Robinson was earning $85,000 per film and had won rare script approval, privileges reserved for the studio's biggest stars. Off-screen, he carried the same intensity. During World War II, he volunteered for risky USO tours, joking that a 5-foot 5-inch target gave the enemy less to aim at. Behind the humor was real conviction. He donated heavily to anti-fascist causes and built a renowned art collection worth millions. Number 4. James Cagney. James Cagney was never 5 feet 9 inches, no matter what the studios claimed. Military records and biographers put him at 5 feet 5 inches, several inches shorter than the average American man of his era. In the 1920s and 30s, that mattered. Leading men were expected to loom large, so Cagney was filmed from low angles, stood on crates, and was often paired with shorter actresses, while newspapers repeated the studio's carefully maintained illusion. Cagney joked about it, once saying he had to jump to reach his own punchlines. But his size never limited him. It sharpened him. He moved like compressed energy. In The Public Enemy, 1931, his infamous grapefruit scene and restless pacing turned his compact frame into pure intensity. You couldn't look away. That same force carried off-screen. In 1936, Cagney famously stood on a studio golf cart just to meet Jack Warner eye to eye while demanding equal pay with Edward G. Robinson, and he won. Directors quickly realized his height wasn't a weakness, but an advantage. In White Heat, his frantic run through ladders and catwalks gave the film its breathless power, a climax few taller actors could have matched. Even portraying real figures posed no problem. In Yankee Doodle Dandy, his tap routines were tightened and sped up, turning dance into percussion. By the time the American Film Institute ranked him among the greatest stars of classic Hollywood, his height had become irrelevant, just a footnote to his impact. Number 5. Charlie Chaplin. Charlie Chaplin stood just 5 feet 5 inches, several inches shorter than the average American man of the 1920s. At a time when movie stars were expected to look tall and commanding, Chaplin ignored the rule entirely. Instead, he leaned into it. He designed a costume that made him seem even smaller: baggy trousers, a tight coat, a tiny bowler hat, and a thin cane, like a child wearing adult clothes. But once he moved, the illusion vanished. He ran, spun, tripped, and danced with explosive energy. In The Kid, he dashed alongside towering policemen, yet the camera followed only him. His size disappeared in motion. That stature became an advantage. In 1923, he earned $1.25 million for A Woman of Paris, far more than taller stars of the era. Studio records even noted that his compact frame reduced filming costs. More importantly, audiences felt drawn to him. Viewers instinctively rooted for Chaplin, especially when larger bullies threatened him, a reaction he expertly exploited in films like City Lights. Off-screen, Chaplin was just as strategic. In 1919, he co-founded United Artists as an equal partner with Mary Pickford, Douglas Fairbanks, and D.W. Griffith. He later summed up his philosophy simply: physical size mattered far less than creative control. By the early 1950s, his fortune had reached tens of millions, and even exile couldn't diminish his influence. His height was modest, but his impact was monumental. Number 7. Alan Ladd. Publicly, Paramount listed him as 5 feet 6 inches, though insiders quietly said he was closer to 5 feet 5 inches. Studio records show that from 1943 to 1956, he received 2 pairs of custom 2-inch elevator shoes every 6 months, paid for under wardrobe maintenance. The effort began after his breakthrough in This Gun for Hire, 1942, where his icy assassin opposite the 4-foot 11-inch Veronica Lake created a perfectly balanced on-screen image. The studio protected that image aggressively. From 1944 to 1949, his contract required female co-stars to be 5 feet 4 inches or shorter unless special sets were approved. On Shane, 1951, trenches were literally dug so 6-foot Van Heflin would appear lower than him, over 1,200 feet of trench at a cost that would equal about $100,000 today. When he starred opposite the much taller Sophia Loren in Boy on a Dolphin, 1957, crews built a raised boardwalk just for him, while she walked beside it in the water. Even then, the camera had to be tilted to sell the illusion. None of it hurt his image. If anything, it strengthened it. By 1953, he was one of America's top box office stars, earning more per film than many taller icons. As his son later explained, audiences saw him as the quiet underdog, small in stature, but impossible to underestimate. Number 8. Lou Costello. Lou Costello stood just 5 feet 5 inches, a height that rarely led to stardom in 1930s Hollywood. Instead of fighting it, he embraced it, especially beside his 6-foot partner, Bud Abbott. The sharp contrast between the wide-eyed, frantic little guy and the calm, towering, straight man became the engine of their comedy. Costello leaned hard into the image, wearing tight suits, pitching his voice high, and spinning into chaos while yelling, "Hey, Abbott!" Audiences couldn't get enough. Buck Privates, 1941, cost very little to make and earned millions, turning Abbott and Costello into one of the biggest comedy acts in America. His size pushed him to be more inventive. He fell harder, tripped bigger, and made every mishap look worse and funnier. Off-screen, he was tougher than he looked. As a teenager in New Jersey, he boxed undefeated as an amateur and even worked as a stuntman in the 1920s. He wrote his own gags and performed his own falls, something few comedians could do. By the early 1940s, Costello had become the true draw, earning the larger share of profits and headlining massive war bond tours that raised tens of millions of dollars. At his peak, he was making a fortune per film. Then tragedy struck. In November 1943, moments before going live on NBC, Costello learned that his infant son had drowned. He went on stage anyway and delivered Who's on First flawlessly. Number 9, Burgess Meredith. Burgess Meredith stood 5 feet 5.5 inches. Not tall, not flashy, but impossible to ignore. Early on, a stage director worried he'd disappear beside a taller co-star and told him to project as if shouting across Times Square. Meredith did exactly that. On opening night in 1935, the audience called him back for 29 curtain calls. Hollywood noticed immediately. His first film contract paid $25,000, a huge sum at the time. He was never cast as a traditional leading man, so he became something more memorable: the underdog. In Of Mice and Men, 1939, his performance felt raw and towering, even though critics joked he was the tallest man on screen. During World War II, Meredith entertained troops overseas, once standing on an ammo crate to reach thousands of soldiers. War correspondent Ernie Pyle later chose him to portray G.I. Joe, earning Meredith major acclaim. Politics briefly sidelined him in the early 1950s, but he adapted, recording thousands of radio shows where height didn't matter. Television brought reinvention. As the Penguin on Batman, he became larger than life, and decades later, at 68, he delivered an iconic turn as Mickey in Rocky. One gritty speech helped launch a film that became a phenomenon and earned Meredith an Oscar nomination. Number 10. Peter Lorre. Peter Lorre stood about 5 feet 5 inches, maybe even less, but on screen he felt enormous. Size vanished once the camera found him. In 1931, his chilling performance in M left such a mark that some Berliners claimed they spotted him in the streets and called the police. The panic only fueled the film's success, boosting ticket sales dramatically. After leaving Germany in 1933, Alfred Hitchcock cast him without hesitation. Hitchcock cared about presence, not height, and Lorre radiated it. In The Man Who Knew Too Much, he blended into crowds, yet drew the eye like a warning signal. Hollywood soon leaned into the contrast, pairing him with towering actors like Sidney Greenstreet, a combination that reliably lifted box office numbers. Lorre never fought his stature, he used it. Between his late 20s and early 40s, he received hundreds of role offers and commanded top-tier pay. By the mid-1940s, he even earned top billing at Warner Brothers, a rare feat for someone his size. When he died in 1964, the New York Times summed it up perfectly: a small man who could still dominate every scene he entered. Number 11. Buster Keaton. Most stars of the era were tall, booming, and larger than life. Buster Keaton was none of those things. Standing just 5 feet 5 inches, he still became one of the defining figures of silent cinema. Born Joseph Frank Keaton in 1895, he was thrown into show business as a child. Literally. In his family's vaudeville act, his father hurled him across the stage, even sewing a suitcase handle into his costume to make the tosses easier. It looked cruel, but it trained Keaton perfectly. He learned how to fall without injury, how to twist in midair, and how to protect his head every time he hit the ground. When he moved to film in 1917, that training became his edge. His compact build gave him a low center of gravity, making him unusually stable and able to withstand impacts that would flatten taller actors. Keaton pushed that advantage to extremes. In Sherlock Jr., 1924, a train dumped thousands of liters of water on him, secretly fracturing his neck, an injury he didn't discover for years. In Steamboat Bill Jr., 1928, a collapsing house facade missed his head by inches because he stood on a precisely marked spot without flinching. By the late 1920s, he was earning top-tier pay and running his own studio. His height was often used for contrast, but Keaton never resisted it. He stayed stone-faced through chaos, letting the world fall apart around him. That calm expression became legendary. Though sound films and studio control stalled his career, television revived it in the 1950s, introducing new audiences to the quiet, fearless grace of the Great Stone Face. In an industry obsessed with size, these 11 stars proved that presence mattered far more than inches. They bent the camera, rewrote contracts, and turned so-called limitations into unforgettable power, changing Hollywood forever in the process. Which of these actors surprised you the most, and who do you think truly owned the screen despite the odds? Let us know in the comments below. See you next time.